Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, thousands turn out to cheer on former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo as he returns from a decade in exile. He spent much of that time facing war crimes charges at the International Criminal Court before being acquitted in 2019. Also, the first president of Zambia dies at the age of 97. Kenneth Kaunda was a champion of African nationalism, leading the push for independence both at home and elsewhere in the region. And the 60th Annecy International Animation Festival kicks off in France with an African flavour. Talent from the continent is front and centre to the theme of this year's event. But first, there were jubilant scenes in Abidjan as supporters of ex-Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo flocked along the route of his ride to party headquarters after his return to the country after a decade away. He'd been living in Belgium after being cleared of war crimes charges at the International Criminal Court in 2019. Delana D'Souza tells us more.
Throngs of supporters gather at Abidjan's airport to welcome a former president. Laurent Gbagbo back at home for the first time in nearly a decade. The 76-year-old's homecoming made possible after current President Alassane Ouattara helped facilitate the return.
C'est l'arrivée de mon père même là. Je m'en vais le chercher. Et puis je vis avec lui.
According to the former president's attorney, who travelled with him from Brussels, Laurent Gbagbo wants to play a role in reconciling the country. Ivory Coast was pushed to the brink of civil war after he failed to recognize the outcome of elections in 2010. Over 3,000 people were killed in post-election violence. It resulted in his arrest and transfer to the International Criminal Court. For his supporters, his presence is needed to help the country turn the page.
Il nous a quittés pendant une décennie. Et nous sommes là aujourd'hui pour l'accueillir avec joie et de l'allégresse. Parce que c'est une personnalité à qui on a besoin pour la réconciliation vraie et l'avancement du pays.
Gbagbo was sentenced to 20 years in jail in absentia in Ivory Coast on charges the Central Bank of West African states was broken into amid the post-election crisis. A presidential pardon could be on the cards in order to help the country truly unite.
Well, Hanan Fejani's in Abidjan for us. She joins me now. Hanan, so it's been a crazy day for you. But Laurent Gbagbo, once he actually did get in front of his supporters, did he have any words for those who've been holding out for his return for such a long time?
Well, he definitely did not do a long speech tonight. When he did make his way to the former HQ of the FBI pro-Gbagbo party, his party, he just said a few words, really. He thanked his partisans for showing up for him, for being loyal to him, and most of all, he said he was happy and relieved to be back to Africa, happy and relieved to be back to Ivory Coast. He also mentioned his mother and said that he felt emotional about being able to finally go and pay tribute to her in his native village of Mama.
Now, there was a huge build-up amongst his camp in preparation for his return. But bearing in mind that he did leave the country to face war crimes charges, what about those who are less willing to see him as a welcoming hero? What are their expectations?
Well, really, what we thought was going to happen from what we heard in the days leading up to this arrival and this return of Laurent Gbagbo is that, for instance, the Collective Committee for Victims of the Post-Electoral Crisis of 2011, namely their president, Isiaka Diaby, who had said that he would show up at the presidential pavilion at the airport to ensure and put pressure on the Ivorian government so that he gets arrested as soon as he lands. We did not see him and any member of his committee there on the ground. Just as a reminder, he faces, and I mean Laurent Gbagbo, he still faces a conviction for what is known as the West African Central Bank holdup of 2011, date when former President Laurent Gbagbo got access to the coffers of the bank despite economic sanctions, and he was sentenced in 2018 by the Ivorian Supreme Court to a 20-year sentence, a jail sentence. So what they were expecting is that as soon as the former president would land, that he would just be apprehended and put into custody, and that did not happen. So we definitely did not see that unfold as we were there. There wasn't much of a I guess, critical crowd at the airport. Mostly his partisans were there, and mostly people who wanted to be part of that greeting party but couldn't make their way into the pavilion, but managed to just sort of slide through little cracks and be able to just see him and chant and greet from afar.
When it comes to critics, I mean, one would have thought that for a man who was once Laurent Gbagbo's greatest enemy, Alassane Ouattara, the current president, would be in that camp. But he seems to be playing the bigger person and as welcoming Gbagbo back. What's his play there?
Well, I would say personally that this is all a very, strategically crafted approach, really. The government and President Ouattara in particular have basically in the last few months shown this positive and openness towards Laurent Gbagbo and the FPI party, and that's all part of what they call this national reconciliation process that in their view and according to what they're saying is a necessary step towards going forward and moving forward in the country. The president was elected for a third term. Yes.
Unfortunately, that is all we have time for, but thank you so much for being in the midst of this crazy day in Ivory Coast following the return of Laurent Gbagbo for us. Hanan Fejani there for us in Abidjan. Moving on in other news, the man known as Zambia's founding father has died aged 97. Kenneth Kaunda was admitted to hospital on Monday to be treated for pneumonia. He was the leader of the campaign to end colonial rule, and news of his passing has hit his countrymen hard.
I feel so sad, but I believe he lived his life, and we ought to celebrate the freedom that he brought to us.
For me, he was not just an ordinary Zambian, but he was our founding father of this great nation, Zambia. We are where we are here because of him.
Well, Kaunda was elected the first president of Zambia in 1964 and ruled for 27 years. His battle for African independence saw him also offer support for the struggle in neighbouring countries. Nicolas Choumat tells us more.
Kenneth Kaunda was one of the last remaining African liberation heroes. He became Zambia's first president when the country gained independence from Britain in 1964. He then remained in power for 27 years. During his rule, he made Zambia a centre for anti-colonial groups fighting to end white minority rule in countries like South Africa and Zimbabwe. The economy fared badly during his time in office. In 1991, he was forced to hold multi-party elections, which he lost after having become increasingly autocratic. His son died of AIDS in 1986, and he began a personal crusade against the disease.
I'm committed to this cause, not really because of my son. That's important, of course, but what is important is that this is a disease that's killing millions, especially on this continent of Africa, and we must fight it.
During his nearly 3 decades at the helm of Zambia, Kaunda said he believed in humanism, a mix, according to him, of Christian ethics, traditional African values and socialist principles. He died aged 97, and the authorities have declared 21 days of mourning.
Well, Ethiopia is calling on the African Union to stop a new commission being set up to look into allegations of abuse committed in the northern region of Tigray. Thousands of people are thought to have been killed since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops in against the local TPLF leaders back in November. Maria Gerth Nicolescu tells us more.
The statement published by the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs reveals the first public disagreement between the African Union and the Ethiopian government since the conflict in Tigray started last November. Ethiopia condemned the move by the African Union to establish a commission of inquiry into human rights abuses in the Tigray region. It said that the decision was unilateral and that it did not fit into the agreement reached last March to launch a joint investigation into those abuses. The commission of inquiry inquiry was set to start working this Thursday for a renewable period of 3 months. Alleged human rights abuses in Tigray include gang rapes as well as killings of civilians, including against children. These atrocities could have been committed by all parties to the conflict, including Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers. A joint investigation between the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN's Commission on Human Rights is currently underway in Tigray. The Ethiopian Attorney General also said that 50 soldiers are currently on trial for rapes and killings of civilians.
And finally, the 60th edition of the Annecy International Animated Film Festival has made a welcome post-pandemic return here in France. While it is on a much smaller scale than previous years, it's kicked off with a boom by focusing on African talent. Ellen Gainsford and Eloise Melin went out to check it out.
The queues for screenings are socially distanced under the sunshine, but attendees are happy to return in person to the 60th edition of the Annecy International Animated Film Festival. This year, the spotlight is on African animation.
I think this festival is really well timed to celebrate African talent because, not just because of COVID, but because of the internet. The playing field has been flattening for a very long time. So some tools which could only be accessed by some people who are able to go to some place to study are now readily available by groups of people from all over the world.
The festival draws global talent to the picturesque town of Annecy in the southeast of France. From seasoned directors to emerging talents like Malian student Moise Togo, whose film $75,000 shows how animation can be used to explore difficult themes.
It's a film about albinism. There are false beliefs around this in Africa. I mixed live footage with 3D animation.
Showcasing the full spectrum of the industry, Annecy also presents the best in children's animation. Produced in the Ivory Coast, the series Kaunda tackles educational topics, including the importance of free elections and protecting the environment.
We try to deal with really serious subjects, but adapt them for children. Make things easier so that children can absorb the basic idea. That way, when they grow up, they will have these values.
But while African animation is flourishing, it's not yet as well known as other, more established sectors.
It's not as present as European, American or Asian animation. I think that African animation is not known widely enough. And from what I've seen, it's worth exploring.
Disney has also spotted the potential on the continent and for the first time is collaborating with a Pan-African studio for the series Iwaju. Before this year's event, only 47 African films have been screened in the 60 years that Annecy Festival has existed. Organisers hope that this year marks a turning point.
Well, that's it from Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.